When I first moved into the neighborhood, I didn't think much of the homeowners association. The houses were tidy, lawns neatly cut, and the streets looked like something straight out of a postcard. I'd come from a more rural area where neighbors minded their own business and property lines meant something sacred. But here, in this HOA-controlled slice of suburbia, it didn't take long to realize there was a different kind of law, one enforced not by the county, not by the police, but by the power-hungry few who sat on the HOA board. At the center of it all was a woman the neighborhood only ever referred to as Karen. Her real name was something like Kendra, but trust me, Karen fit her better. She had that permanent look of disapproval, like she'd just smelled something foul every time she saw someone enjoying themselves. I bought my house for the peace and quiet, and for my son, Ethan. After my wife passed away 2 years ago, I wanted to give him stability, somewhere safe, a fresh start. The home wasn't fancy, just a solid 2-story brick place with a fenced yard and a big oak tree out back. It was the kind of house where a kid could climb, run, and feel free again. I thought I'd found the perfect spot. For a while, it even felt that way. We'd grill on weekends, play basketball in the driveway, and sometimes fall asleep on the couch watching old superhero movies. Life was finally slowing down, steady and quiet. But that quiet, I soon learned, was a fragile thing, one nosy, entitled neighbor away from being shattered completely. My first encounter with Karen happened about 2 weeks after we moved in. I was trimming the hedges, earbuds in, music low enough to hear the rustle of leaves. Out of nowhere, I heard this sharp voice yell, "Excuse me. Excuse me." I turned around to see her, a woman in her mid-50s with a bleach blonde bob haircut, oversized sunglasses, and a clipboard in hand like she was running a military operation. "You're not supposed to have those hedges that tall," she said, snapping her gum. HOA Regulation 4C, no bushes over 3 feet near the sidewalk. I paused the trimmer, blinked, and said, "Ma'am, we just moved in. I didn't even know there was a height rule for bushes." She huffed. "There's a handbook. Everyone gets one. Maybe you should read it." Then she turned and strutted off like she'd just saved the neighborhood from chaos. That was my introduction to HOA life, and to Karen. Over the following months, she became a constant presence, or rather, a constant nuisance. If my trash bins were at the curb an hour too early, I'd find a printed warning taped to my door. If Ethan left his basketball hoop by the driveway, another note. Once, I even got fined because my truck blocked the aesthetic view of the cul-de-sac. I started keeping a folder just for her letters, my personal Karen collection. At first, I tried to ignore her, figuring she'd get bored. But people like Karen don't get bored, they get bold. One afternoon, I came home early from work to find her standing in my yard, again. She was photographing my mailbox. "Can I help you?" I called out. She didn't even flinch. "Your mailbox flag is the wrong color," she said without looking up. "It's supposed to be matte black, not glossy." I just laughed. "Lady, it's a mailbox, not a museum piece." She glared. "This isn't funny. We have standards." That was the first time I told her, calmly but firmly, to get off my property. She made a note on her clipboard like she was writing me a ticket, then stomped away. I should have known right then that things were going to escalate. By late summer, Karen had escalated from petty harassment to full-blown intrusion. She'd walk by the house slowly, peeking through my fence slats, pretending to check for code compliance. Ethan started asking why that lady was always watching us. I told him not to worry, but deep down I was uneasy. There's a line between nosy and creepy, and Karen had long since crossed it. One night, while I was reading in the living room, I saw movement outside the window, a flashlight beam flickering along the side of my house. My first thought was that someone was trying to break in. I grabbed my phone and rushed out the front door, only to catch Karen halfway through photographing my recycling bins. "You scared me half to death," I shouted. "It's 10 o'clock at night." She didn't even apologize, just muttered something about night inspections and hustled off. That was when I decided to install security cameras and a motion alarm system, not just for peace of mind but for proof. The cameras gave me a sense of control again. They covered every angle, the porch, backyard, and side entrances. I showed Ethan how the motion alarm worked. If someone tries to open a door or window when it's armed, it'll sound loud enough to wake the whole neighborhood. He loved the idea. He called it our Batman system. I told him only to use the panic button in a real emergency, and he nodded like a soldier receiving his mission. For the next few weeks, everything was quiet. Karen still glared at us from across the street, but she hadn't stepped foot on our property. I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd moved on to torment someone else. Then came that Saturday morning, the day everything changed. It was early, around 7:30 a.m. The sun was just breaking through the blinds, birds chirping, the usual calm before the weekend bustle. Ethan was still in his pajamas, munching cereal in front of the TV. I was half awake, sipping coffee, scrolling through work emails. The security system was on standby, not armed, since we were home, but the window sensors still monitored activity. That's when I heard a faint rattle coming from the living room window. At first, I thought it was the wind or maybe a squirrel on the sill. Then I heard it again, a distinct scrape, metal against glass. I froze. I set my coffee down quietly and moved closer, heart rate climbing. From where I stood, I could see the curtains shift slightly, just enough to catch a glimpse of movement outside. Someone was crouched near the window, fingers prying at the latch. My stomach dropped. I reached for my phone and whispered, "Ethan, go upstairs." But before I could move another step, I heard the unmistakable sound of the window sliding upward, and then, unbelievably, the sight of a human hand pushing through. For a split second, I thought maybe it was some neighborhood kid pulling a prank. But then I heard that voice, that shrill, self-righteous tone that made my blood boil. I told him this window tint wasn't HOA approved, it was Karen. My jaw dropped. She was actually crawling through my window. This woman, this self-appointed neighborhood warden, was breaking into my house, in broad daylight, muttering about regulations. My instinct screamed to shout, to grab my phone and call 911, but before I could even react, Ethan did something that would change everything. The moment Karen's foot hit the floor, the motion sensor tripped, a piercing, ear-splitting alarm exploded through the house. Ethan had pressed the panic button. The siren blared, the lights flashed, and Karen screamed like she'd seen a ghost. She stumbled backward, tripping over my coffee table, scattering papers and magazines everywhere. "What the hell is happening?" she shrieked, covering her ears. The alarm was deafening, the kind designed to shake intruders to their core. Ethan came running to my side, clutching his toy walkie-talkie like it was a weapon. I rushed to the keypad, silenced the alarm, and turned to face her. Karen was standing there, eyes wide, hair frazzled, looking nothing like the queen of the cul-de-sac she fancied herself to be. "You broke into my house," I said, my voice low and steady. She tried to compose herself, clutching her clipboard like a shield. "I didn't break in, the latch was loose. I was just checking the tint compliance, you crawled through my window." I cut her off, disbelief turning into anger. "That's trespassing, Karen. That's breaking and entering." Before she could argue, I heard sirens outside. The security company had already alerted local law enforcement, part of the system's auto-response. Karen's face drained of color. "Oh no, this is a misunderstanding," she stammered. You can't call the police, I am the HOA president. Then you should know the law, I said coldly. You just broke it. The officers arrived within minutes, stepping into my living room where Karen still stood in shock. One of them, Officer Reynolds, recognized me. We'd met at a neighborhood watch meeting weeks prior. Everything okay here? He asked, scanning the scene. I nodded toward Karen. Caught her crawling through my window. Karen jumped in, waving her clipboard. It's not what it looks like. I was conducting an inspection. The officer raised an eyebrow. Inside his house? She froze. That moment marked the beginning of a chain reaction that would shake the whole neighborhood, and the HOA, to its core. What Karen thought was a harmless inspection turned into something far bigger than she ever imagined. And that was just the beginning. When the police cuffed Karen on my front porch, the neighborhood practically came alive. Curtains shifted, phones peeked out from blinds, and whispers traveled faster than the sirens that had brought them there. It was the kind of suburban spectacle people secretly loved, drama right outside their picture-perfect homes. I stood there on the porch, arms crossed, heart still pounding from the adrenaline, while Ethan clung to my side. Officer Reynolds guided Karen down the steps, reading her rights as she protested with every breath. This is ridiculous. I'm the HOA president. You can't do this to me, she kept shouting, voice cracking between rage and disbelief. The irony was almost cinematic. The same woman who once left nasty notes on my door about my trash cans was now being escorted off my property for breaking and entering. I'll admit, watching her get placed into the patrol car was satisfying, not because I wanted revenge, but because justice had finally shown up where common sense had long been missing. Still, I felt the tremor of what was coming. In neighborhoods like ours, word spreads faster than wildfire. The minute that squad car pulled away, I knew the HOA board would circle the wagons, and I'd be painted as the villain who humiliated their president. But that morning, as I knelt to reassure Ethan that everything was okay, I also knew I wasn't backing down. Not this time. After the police left, I called my lawyer, a friend from my old precinct days. See, what Karen didn't know was that before I switched to working private security consulting, I'd been a police officer for nearly 15 years. I knew how to handle evidence, how to document a case, and most importantly, how to make sure people like her didn't weasel their way out of accountability. I handed the responding officers the footage from my security cameras, clearly showing Karen unlatching the window and crawling inside. That's all you need, I told them. They nodded, professional and respectful, unlike the self-appointed law enforcement Karen believed herself to be. By noon, the entire cul-de-sac was buzzing. Neighbors I'd barely spoken to came by pretending to check their mail, their curiosity almost comical. One even asked, "Is it true she broke in?" Like, literally? I just said, "Watch the news tonight." Sure enough, by evening, a local news van showed up at the end of the street. Suburban HOA president arrested for trespassing. The headline was everywhere within hours. The footage from my door camera leaked online, and suddenly, my quiet neighborhood became a trending topic. Karen's empire of control was crumbling in real time. But with Karen out of the picture, temporarily, at least, came the next wave, damage control from the HOA board. The very next morning, I woke to an envelope taped to my front door. Notice of violation, unauthorized security devices installed without HOA approval. I laughed out loud. My cameras had just prevented a crime, and now they were trying to fine me for it. I took a photo of the letter and sent it to my lawyer. He replied, "Let them dig their own hole. Every letter they send is evidence." Over the next few days, I started seeing patterns. HOA members taking photos of my property, acting concerned, whispering when I walked by. I wasn't surprised. Karen had her loyal little circle, people who probably owed her favors or feared her wrath. Without her at the helm, they were desperate to keep control. They scheduled an emergency HOA meeting to discuss recent events and review homeowner compliance. I got the invite, hand-delivered, of course, complete with a thinly veiled threat that non-attendance may be considered non-compliance. Typical. I decided to attend, not out of obligation, but because I was done letting them control the narrative. The meeting was held at the community clubhouse 3 nights later. I arrived early, wearing a plain button-up shirt and jeans. No badge, no title, just a homeowner ready to speak his mind. The room was packed. People whispered, eyes darting toward me, then away again. At the front table sat the remaining board members, a trio of middle-aged folks who looked like they hadn't slept since the incident. In the center chair sat Harold, the HOA vice president, a man with a gut as round as his ego. He adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat dramatically. "Mr. Cooper," he began, "we're here to address some serious concerns about your conduct." I almost laughed. "My conduct?" "Let me guess," I said. "You're going to tell me my security system violates some obscure bylaw." Harold frowned. "We're here to discuss the disruption you caused in our community, including the involvement of law enforcement." "Disruption?" I repeated. "You mean when your president broke into my home?" A few people in the audience chuckled quietly, others shifted uncomfortably. Harold's face reddened. "There's no proof it was intentional trespassing," he said stiffly. "Karen has served this community for years. She was concerned about tint compliance." I cut in. "She said that while climbing through my window. I have it all on video. Would you like me to play it?" I reached for my phone, and Harold immediately waved his hands. "That won't be necessary." The rest of the meeting turned into a verbal chess match. Every time they tried to corner me with some bogus claim, I countered with logic, law, or plain common sense. When they accused me of disrespecting the board, I reminded them of their legal boundaries. When they questioned my attitude, I reminded them their president was facing a criminal charge. By the end of the hour, the crowd's mood had shifted. People who had been afraid to speak up were now whispering agreement. I saw it in their faces. They were tired of being bullied, fined, and dictated to. For the first time, someone had stood up to the HOA, and it was working. When the meeting ended, several neighbors came up to shake my hand. "About time someone did something," one said. Another whispered, "She fined me last month because my kid left a scooter on the sidewalk." There was this ripple effect of relief, like a spell had been broken. But I also knew Karen wasn't done. People like her don't vanish quietly. She'd make bail, regroup, and come back swinging. I just didn't realize how far she'd go. 3 days later, she did exactly that. It was a Thursday evening when I saw her car pull back into her driveway. A white SUV, spotless as ever, glinting under the sunset. I watched from my porch, sipping a beer, as she stepped out, sunglasses on, head high, as if nothing had happened. She moved briskly, clutching her phone, pretending not to notice the neighbors watching. For a moment, I almost admired her nerve. Most people would have moved out after a public arrest, but Karen was built differently, pure entitlement wrapped in denial. That night, she made her first move. I caught her pacing at the end of my driveway, phone to her ear, clearly trying to provoke. I could hear snippets of her voice carried by the breeze: unlawful harassment, defamation, legal counsel. I ignored her, knowing any reaction would fuel her fire. But around midnight, I heard something that made me sit up in bed, the sound of my front gate clicking shut. I got up quietly, checked the monitor on my security feed, and there she was. Karen, standing in my yard again, flashlight in hand, snapping pictures of my garage door. I couldn't believe it. I called out through the speaker system, "You're trespassing, Karen." Again. She froze, looked straight into the camera, and hissed, "You think you can embarrass me? You have no idea who you're dealing with." Then she stormed off, muttering curses. I saved the footage, emailed it straight to my lawyer, and went back to bed, though sleep never really came. The next morning, I got an email from the HOA with the subject line, "Notice of intent to revoke privileges." They were threatening to suspend my right to use community facilities, the pool, the park, even the mailbox cluster, until I resolved outstanding disputes. I nearly spat out my coffee. They were weaponizing the HOA itself to retaliate. I forwarded the email to my lawyer again, who responded with 2 words, "Keep everything." By now, half the neighborhood had turned on the HOA. The other half was terrified of them. People began approaching me quietly, at the store, on walks, even at the gas station. They told me their own stories of harassment, fines for having the wrong shade of curtains, citations for unapproved lawn decor, even letters threatening legal action over Christmas lights. Karen's reign had gone on for years, and no one had dared challenge her. Until now. Then came the moment I decided enough was enough. I wasn't just going to defend myself, I was going to expose the entire system. I started by pulling every letter, every email, every so-called violation notice I'd received since moving in. I cataloged dates, signatures, even typos. I went through public HOA meeting minutes and cross-referenced them with county property laws. What I found was staggering: dozens of violations of their own charter, fines imposed without votes, rules invented without approval, and even money missing from the community improvement budget. Karen's HOA wasn't just overreaching, it was corrupt. My lawyer and I compiled everything into a report and submitted it to the county housing authority and local news outlets. I wasn't sure what would happen next, whether they'd ignore it or blow it wide open. But 2 days later, a news anchor was standing on my lawn, microphone in hand, asking for a statement. I simply said, all I ever wanted was peace. But peace doesn't come when people abuse power. That clip aired on the evening news, and by the next morning, Karen's name was synonymous with HOA corruption across the state. But Karen still had one last trick up her sleeve. And it wasn't going to be legal. Because that night, something happened that made every previous encounter look tame, something that proved Karen's obsession had gone far beyond control. Something that would put my son in danger. The first sign that something was wrong that night wasn't the sound, it was the silence. My neighborhood, for all its picture-perfect charm, always had a kind of low hum at night: crickets, a dog barking down the block, a car door closing somewhere. But that night, there was nothing. Just this heavy, pressing stillness that made my skin crawl. I was sitting in the living room, going over some paperwork for my lawyer, while Ethan was upstairs finishing his homework. The clock had just passed 10 p.m. when the motion alert from the side yard pinged on my phone. Normally, it was just raccoons or the neighbor's cat. But when I opened the camera feed, the screen froze for half a second, then showed something that made my stomach twist. It was Karen. She was back again, this time dressed in black, creeping along the fence line with a flashlight. I could see her scanning the ground, whispering into her phone as if coordinating with someone. My first thought was disbelief. She'd already been arrested once, how could she be this reckless? Then came the anger. Whatever this was, it had crossed from nuisance into dangerous obsession. I turned off the lamp, killed the interior lights, and watched her through the blinds. She moved deliberately, pausing now and then to peek over the fence toward my backyard. That's when I noticed something in her hand, not her usual clipboard, but a small metal object, maybe a lockpick or screwdriver. I stepped quietly toward the stairs and whispered, "Ethan, Stay in your room. Don't come down, no matter what you hear." His eyes widened, but he nodded. I reached for the drawer by the kitchen, the one where I kept my flashlight and my sidearm. I didn't plan to use it, I just needed to feel in control. Years in law enforcement had trained me for confrontation, but this wasn't a criminal stranger, it was my neighbor. That somehow made it even worse. The back porch light flickered on automatically as Karen approached the door, and she froze like a deer in headlights. I stepped out onto the patio slowly, keeping my voice calm but firm. "Karen," I said, "you need to leave. Right now." She flinched, spinning around, eyes wild behind the glow of her flashlight. "You don't understand," she hissed. "You're destroying this neighborhood. You're ruining everything I built." Her voice trembled between rage and desperation. "Built?" I repeated. "You built nothing. You've been terrorizing people here for years." Her lips curled into something between a sneer and a smile. "These people need rules. Without me, this place falls apart. I've seen it happen before. I protect this community." "You broke into my house," I said flatly. "You scared my kid. That's not protection, that's insanity." She took a small step closer, flashlight beam jittering. "You think you're some kind of hero because you got me arrested? Because you embarrassed me? You don't belong here, Cooper. You never did." I could feel the tension snapping like wire between us. My phone buzzed in my pocket, another motion alert from the front yard. I glanced at the screen and froze. There were two figures this time. One near the driveway, another near the side gate. My mind raced. Karen wasn't alone. Who else is out there? I demanded. She didn't answer, just glanced over her shoulder nervously. That was all I needed to see. I stepped back toward the door, hit the alarm panic button on my phone, and the siren roared to life again, echoing across the neighborhood. Ethan screamed upstairs, the dog next door started barking like crazy, and lights began flicking on in every nearby house. Karen panicked, dropping her flashlight. She spun and bolted toward the fence. I saw two shadowy figures running off down the street, probably friends or family she'd roped into whatever deranged stunt this was. Within minutes, the flashing red and blue lights of the police arrived, painting the houses in panic colors. I stood on my porch, hands raised in plain sight, as Officer Reynolds jogged up. "She's back?" he asked incredulously. And she wasn't alone this time. I nodded, breathing hard. "Check the footage, front and side cameras." She had help. They swept the area, found tire tracks near the side fence, and even picked up a dropped purse, Karen's, complete with HOA keycards and her ID inside. By midnight, she was back in cuffs. This time, the charges weren't just trespassing, they included attempted burglary, vandalism, and violation of a restraining order. As they led her away, she turned her head toward me and spat out words that still echo in my mind. "You think this is over? You have no idea what you've started." For a moment, I just stood there, heart hammering. What could she possibly mean by that? Then, as the patrol car pulled away, I caught sight of something small glinting under the porch light, a folded note wedged between the boards of my railing. I picked it up and unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, and unmistakably hers. "You may win battles, but I always win the war. The HOA doesn't die with me." It was like something out of a thriller movie, except this wasn't fiction, it was my real life spiraling out of control because one woman couldn't handle losing power. The next day, I filed for a formal restraining order, not just against Karen but also against any other HOA member who attempted to enter my property without consent. My lawyer handled it efficiently, but even he admitted, this is one of the strangest cases I've seen." Meanwhile, the story spread even further. Local TV, radio, online blogs, everyone was talking about the HOA president who snapped. My inbox was flooded with messages from strangers sharing similar stories from across the country. Apparently, HOA abuse was a bigger epidemic than I ever realized. But while the rest of the world saw it as a shocking headline, for me and Ethan, it was personal. Nights were sleepless. Every creak in the house made him jump. Every time a car slowed near our driveway, I felt the weight of paranoia settle on my chest. The sense of security I'd worked so hard to build for my son was gone. I started double-checking every lock, every window, every alarm setting. Even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen's threat wasn't empty. And I was right. A week later, the HOA board called for a special election to replace Karen as president. Normally, that would have been a good thing. But when I saw the candidate list, my blood ran cold. Her husband, Martin, was at the top. The same man who'd barely spoken at past meetings, always sitting quietly beside her, nodding like a shadow. It all made sense now. Karen might have been out legally, but through him, she could still pull the strings. The election was tense. I attended, sitting near the back, watching every handshake, every whispered conversation. The board members looked nervous. They knew their credibility was in shambles. When it came time for nominations, I stood up. "I'd like to nominate myself for HOA president." The room went dead silent. Then, a low murmur rolled through the crowd. Harold, the vice president, cleared his throat. "Mr. Cooper, with all due respect, given the recent truth," I interrupted, "I think it's time this HOA remembered it's supposed to serve homeowners, not rule them." There was applause. Real, spontaneous applause. I saw neighbors who had once avoided eye contact with me now clapping openly. For the first time, I felt the tide shifting completely. By the end of the night, the vote was close, painfully close, but when the final count came in, I had won by just 4 votes. I didn't feel victory, I felt responsibility. Taking over an HOA wasn't exactly on my life goals list, but if it meant protecting my family and restoring sanity to this neighborhood, I'd do it. The first thing I did as president was issue a motion, effective immediately. All surveillance and inspection activities required explicit homeowner consent. The crowd cheered. I added another motion, the dissolution of all prior fines issued under Karen's leadership pending review. That got even louder applause. For the first time in months, I went home feeling like something good had finally come from the chaos. But Karen wasn't done haunting us. 2 nights later, just past midnight, I got a call from Officer Reynolds. "You might want to sit down," he said. My stomach dropped. "What now?" He sighed. Karen posted bail again, but her husband's petition to have the restraining order reviewed, claiming you're using HOA power to retaliate. It was surreal. She was the one who'd broken into my house twice, yet somehow, she was spinning the narrative that I was abusing authority. I knew then that she wasn't just acting out of anger anymore. This was about control, legacy, and ego, the trifecta that drives people like her to madness. The next morning, the tension in the air was palpable. I walked Ethan to the bus stop and could feel eyes watching from windows. Some people smiled, others avoided me. The board, minus Karen, stood by awkwardly at the clubhouse, pretending everything was normal. But it wasn't. Because that afternoon, I received another anonymous envelope, this time without handwriting. Inside was a printed photo, a still image from my security camera feed, showing Ethan playing in the yard. Someone had taken the screenshot directly from my system. I felt cold all over. That meant someone had access, either through hacking or physical interference. I checked the system logs and saw something horrifying. An external IP address had remotely accessed the cameras just 48 hours earlier. My tech buddy traced it back to a public Wi-Fi hub at a nearby cafe, one that Martin, Karen's husband, was known to frequent. My jaw clenched so hard it hurt. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was intimidation. They were targeting my kid. That night, I sat Ethan down and told him we were going to stay at a friend's place for a few days. I didn't tell him why, just that it was a mini vacation. He smiled, grabbed his backpack, and picked his favorite stuffed dinosaur. As we drove away, I looked back at our house glowing softly under the porch light. It used to feel safe. Now it felt like an open wound. But even as I left, I knew I couldn't run forever. Karen wanted me afraid, to break me, to make me second-guess standing up to her. I wasn't about to give her that satisfaction. So, while Ethan slept peacefully at my buddy's place, I went to work. I met with my lawyer, gathered my evidence, and contacted the local DA. This isn't just an HOA dispute anymore, I said. This is criminal stalking, coordinated harassment, and illegal surveillance. He agreed. The next morning, we filed formal charges against both Karen and Martin, attaching the new evidence of digital intrusion. Warrants were issued within 48 hours. By the end of the week, both were arrested, again. This time, the story made national headlines. HOA couple arrested for cyberstalking and harassment of homeowner. It was everywhere. News outlets, social media, talk shows, everyone had an opinion. Some mocked the absurdity of HOA power gone mad. Others saw it as a warning about control, community, and privacy. But for me, it wasn't entertainment. It was the end of a nightmare. Or at least, I thought it was. Because even behind bars, Karen still managed to find a way to send one final message, one that chilled me to my core. A simple letter, mailed to my HOA office, postmarked from the county jail. You may have taken my title, but the rules were mine long before you came here. Enjoy your peace while it lasts. The neighborhood always remembers its order. That was when I realized, this wasn't just about one woman's obsession. It was about power itself, how easily it corrupts, how people cling to it even as it destroys them. And as I looked at that letter, I knew one thing for sure, peace was coming back to my house, but it wouldn't come quietly. When the news broke that Karen and Martin had both been formally charged, the neighborhood felt different, lighter, quieter, freer. People walked their dogs again without looking over their shoulders. Kids rode bikes on the street without their parents whispering, "Stay close to the house." The constant air of anxiety that had hung over the cul-de-sac like humidity in August finally began to lift. But while everyone else celebrated the downfall of the so-called HOA monarchs, I couldn't shake the unease that had settled deep in my chest. See, when you've dealt with chaos long enough, real chaos, peace doesn't feel natural. It feels like the eye of a storm. After Karen's arrest, I officially took over the HOA presidency. It wasn't something I wanted, but it was something that needed doing. The community needed someone who wasn't power-hungry, someone who didn't see rules as weapons. My first few weeks as president were filled with cleanup, both literally and figuratively. We shredded stacks of unnecessary fines, refunded homeowners for bogus citations, and even hosted an open meeting where people could voice their complaints freely. I remember one old man, Mr. Jacobs, standing up and saying, "This is the first time in 10 years I've felt like this HOA gives a damn about people." That hit me harder than I expected. Ethan, meanwhile, was slowly returning to normal. He slept better, laughed more, even started inviting a friend or two over again. But every once in a while, I'd catch him glancing nervously toward the window, like he half expected Karen's face to appear in the glass again. Trauma has a way of sticking, even when you try to cover it with routine. I didn't blame him, I still double-checked the locks every night myself. One weekend, about 3 months after everything had gone down, we decided to throw a small block party, something to bring the community together again. Burgers, music, lemonade, the works. For the first time since moving in, I saw genuine smiles on everyone's faces. The tension that had once divided us had become a kind of bond. People shared their own, Karen stories, laughing now that the danger was gone. One woman recounted how Karen once fined her for planting unapproved tulips. Another confessed she'd been threatened with a lawsuit over a Halloween decoration. The stories were absurd, yet cathartic. That afternoon, as the sun dipped low and laughter echoed down the street, I caught myself thinking, maybe this is what home is supposed to feel like. But peace, as I'd learned, never lasts long in places where control used to reign. It started subtly. A few weeks after the party, I received an anonymous letter in the HOA mailbox. No name, no return address, just a folded piece of paper with a typed message, "You're no better than her. Power always corrupts. You'll see." At first, I brushed it off as some bitter neighbor trying to stir up trouble. I even laughed about it to my lawyer. But the following week, another letter arrived. Then another. Each one more personal than the last. "Enjoying your throne, Mr. President? You think you saved this place, but you just changed the tyrant. Your son deserves a better example." That last one froze me. It wasn't just harassment, it was targeted. Personal. The same chill I'd felt the night Karen crawled through my window came rushing back. I handed the letters to the police, who opened an investigation, but there wasn't much they could do. The mail was untraceable. The fingerprints were smudged. Whoever was sending them knew what they were doing. Then, about a month later, strange things started happening around the house. Small at first, the porch light flickering at random, the gate swinging open despite being latched, motion alerts triggering with no one in sight. I chalked it up to the wind or electrical quirks. But one evening, I came home to find the front door slightly ajar. I froze, every instinct from my law enforcement days kicking in. I drew my weapon, stepped inside, cleared each room carefully. Nothing seemed disturbed, no forced entry, no missing items. But then I saw it, sitting dead center on the living room table, my Karen collection folder. It had been locked away in my office drawer, a drawer that only I had the key to. Someone had taken it out, laid it on the table, and left it open to the very first violation letter she'd ever written me. On top of it was a single sticky note. "Miss me?" I don't remember sitting down, but suddenly I was in the chair, breathing hard, my pulse hammering in my ears. It couldn't be her. She was still awaiting trial, on house arrest at minimum, likely under supervision. But I couldn't shake the thought, what if she'd found a way? What if someone else was doing this for her? I called Officer Reynolds immediately. He came by within the hour, looked through the house, took photos, and checked the locks. "No sign of forced entry," he said grimly. But whoever did this knew exactly what they were looking for. I told him about the letters, the flickering lights, the gate. He nodded slowly. If I didn't know better, I'd say someone's testing your nerves. Testing my nerves. That's exactly what it felt like, psychological warfare. I couldn't sleep that night. Every sound made me jump. Around 3 a.m., I gave up trying and went to check the security footage. That's when I noticed something odd, several hours of footage were missing. The system had automatically rebooted, but the logs showed an external command, the same pattern I'd seen before when Martin hacked in. Someone was still accessing my system. I upgraded everything the next day. New routers, new cameras, encrypted cloud storage, even offline backups. I was done playing defense. If someone wanted to come after me again, I'd be ready. But what I didn't realize was that this wasn't about breaking in anymore, it was about breaking me. 2 nights later, Ethan came running into my room crying. "Dad, I saw someone at the window," he said, voice trembling. I grabbed my flashlight, rushed to his room, and looked out. Nothing. Just darkness. The motion light didn't even trigger. But when I checked the camera feed the next morning, I saw a faint, distorted shape near the edge of the frame, someone wearing a hoodie, standing perfectly still in the yard for almost 2 minutes before walking away. I sent the footage straight to the police. They increased patrols around the neighborhood, but without clear evidence, there wasn't much they could do. Meanwhile, the letters kept coming. Now they included photographs, blurry, low-light shots of my house, sometimes taken through the fence. I started noticing cars idling longer at intersections, shadows where there shouldn't be shadows, neighbors suddenly acting distant. It was like the paranoia Karen had infected the place with was back, but this time it wasn't hers, it was mine. Then came the night that shattered what was left of my composure. It was late, maybe close to midnight. Ethan was asleep, and I was downstairs reviewing security feeds again, trying to calm the constant hum of worry in my head. That's when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of shattering glass. I spun around, heart racing. The sound had come from the kitchen. I moved quickly, flashlight in one hand, weapon in the other, and turned the corner, only to see a brick lying on the floor among shards of glass. Attached to it was a piece of paper, tied with twine. I picked it up and unfolded it with shaking hands. "You can't police everything, officer. Some rules are meant to be broken." There it was again, that word. Officer. Most people in the neighborhood didn't even know I used to be a cop. Only Karen did. That was the confirmation I didn't want, she was behind this, directly or indirectly. I called the police immediately. They arrived within minutes, took the brick and letter as evidence, and swept the property. The detective on duty, a sharp guy named Morales, promised to cross-check Karen's communications. "Even if she's in custody, she could have coordinated this with someone," he said. "She's got connections. Former board members, friends, people who think she's the victim." That night, I sat by the broken window until dawn, gun on the table beside me, watching the sky turn from black to gray. I wasn't afraid anymore, just exhausted. Exhausted from fighting a ghost that refused to stay buried. Over the next week, more pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Morales discovered that Karen had been exchanging letters with one of her old allies on the board, Harold. The same Harold who'd tried to defend her at that first meeting. Apparently, he'd been running errands for her, delivering messages to certain residents and collecting HOA records that could discredit me. The cops raided his house and found evidence of coordinated harassment, copies of the anonymous letters, printed photos of my property, and even a USB drive labeled surveillance. When they questioned him, Harold cracked faster than anyone expected. He admitted Karen had orchestrated everything from the start, even after her arrest. She wanted to make me snap, to make me look paranoid, so the board could claim I was unfit to lead. Her endgame wasn't revenge, it was reputation. She wanted the narrative rewritten so she could return as the wronged woman, reclaim her seat, and restore order. I'll never forget Morales's words that day, "She's not just obsessive. She's strategic." It was like every move she'd made, every trespass, every threat, had been part of a long con to maintain control, even from behind bars. But this time, she'd gone too far. The evidence they collected, the letters, the hacked footage, the notes, was enough to file new charges: conspiracy, witness intimidation, and violation of federal cybercrime statutes. When the verdict came months later, I sat in that courtroom, Ethan beside me, as the judge read out the sentence: 5 years in prison, no possibility of early release. Karen sat there, expressionless, her hands folded neatly in her lap. But when our eyes met, she gave me that same half-smirk, the one she'd worn the day she first scolded me about my hedges. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even hatred. It was certainty. Like she still believed she'd won something I couldn't see. After the sentencing, life slowly, truly, began to return to normal. The HOA became what it should have been all along, a committee for maintenance, not control. We planted new trees, hosted summer barbecues, even set up a scholarship fund in Ethan's name for community service. The neighbors who had once feared Karen's clipboard now laughed about her legend. "Can you believe she actually crawled through your window?" someone would joke, and I'd smile, shaking my head. But deep down, a part of me never fully relaxed. Every creak, every late-night breeze against the windows still brought back flashes of that morning, the sound of the alarm, Ethan's terrified face, Karen's shriek as the siren blared. Some ghosts don't leave when the body's gone. They linger in memories, in habits, in the spaces between silence and sound. One evening, months later, I was sitting on the porch, watching Ethan play basketball under the porch light. The air was crisp, peaceful. For once, there was no sense of dread. No motion alerts, no letters, no trespassers. Just the sound of a ball hitting pavement and a boy laughing. Then, from across the street, I saw the mail carrier approach. She handed me a small envelope, plain, white, no return address. My chest tightened as I opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper, neatly folded. Rules keep us safe. Chaos invites danger. Never forget who built your peace. There was no signature. But the handwriting, it was hers. I stared at it for a long time, the faint smell of cheap perfume clinging to the paper like a ghost that refused to fade. Maybe it was written before she went in. Maybe it was someone else. Or maybe, somehow, she'd found a way to remind me one last time that her shadow still stretched across the fences and lawns she once ruled. Either way, I folded the note, placed it in my Karen collection folder, and locked it away for good. Because some stories don't end, they just stop needing to be told. 6 months had passed since Karen was sentenced, and for the first time in years, life felt like it had rhythm again. My mornings began with coffee on the porch, listening to the quiet hum of the neighborhood, no more shouting, no more complaints about mailbox colors or hedge heights. Just peace. Ethan had adjusted too. His nightmares had faded, and the sparkle in his eyes had returned. Sometimes, he'd even joke about Crazy Karen, using her name like a ghost story kids told to scare each other on Halloween. "Don't forget to mow your lawn, or Karen will crawl through your window," he'd laugh, and I'd chuckle with him, though deep down I knew it wasn't something to laugh about. Not really. Still, laughter was healing, and we both needed that. I'd kept my position as HOA president for stability, but truth be told, I planned to step down soon. Power, even well-intentioned, has a way of clinging to people. I didn't want to become what I'd once fought against. So I trained a new board, younger, open-minded, eager to do things right. People like Leah and Marco, who believed in transparency, kindness, and actual community. We drafted new bylaws that limited the HOA's power and created checks to prevent another Karen regime. It was tedious work, but necessary. Still, every so often, something would happen that reminded me of how close we'd come to real danger. Like the day I caught a woman in her 50s snapping photos of my front yard. She claimed to be from the county assessor's office, but when I called the department later, they had no record of her visit. Or the time someone left a neighborhood watch flyer on my doorstep, except our community didn't have a neighborhood watch anymore. We disbanded it after Karen had used it as her personal surveillance squad. I didn't report those things. I just noted them, filed them mentally under strange but not dangerous. Life had to go on. You can't live forever in the shadow of fear. That philosophy was tested again one cool autumn morning. Ethan had gone to a friend's house for a sleepover, and I was finally catching up on paperwork when I heard a knock at the door. When I opened it, a man in a gray suit stood on the porch. He introduced himself as a journalist from a local news magazine, said he was doing a story on HOA abuse and homeowner resilience. He wanted to interview me about what had happened with Karen. At first, I refused. I didn't want to relive it, didn't want Ethan to read about it someday in print, to see the worst chapter of his childhood turned into clickbait. But then the reporter said something that made me pause. She's become something of a case study, he explained. Apparently, her behavior has sparked national HOA reform discussions. Lawmakers are using your case as an example of how private neighborhood associations can cross legal and ethical lines. That hit me harder than I expected. Something dark and painful had actually triggered change. Maybe, just maybe, the nightmare hadn't been for nothing. So, I agreed to the interview. For 3 hours, I told him everything, from the first day Karen left that note about my truck to the night she crawled through my window, to the alarm, the trial, and the fallout. He listened quietly, taking notes. When we finished, he said softly, "You know, it's rare that people stand up to that kind of power and win. You didn't just protect your family, you helped redefine what's acceptable in a community." Those words stayed with me long after he left. The article published 2 weeks later under the title, "The Day an HOA President Crossed the Line, and the Cop Who Stopped Her." It went viral almost overnight. News stations picked it up, HOA reform forums debated it, and my inbox flooded with messages, hundreds of them. Some were from people thanking me for speaking up. Others shared their own horror stories about overreaching HOAs. One man from Arizona wrote, "Your story gave me the courage to fight my board when they tried to fine me for flying a veteran's flag." Another from Georgia said, "I thought I was crazy. Now I realize I'm not alone." I didn't expect the story to resonate that deeply. But the truth is, people all over the country were living in fear of their own versions of Karen, the petty tyrants hiding behind bylaws and clipboards, drunk on a taste of control. For the first time, I realized this wasn't just about me. It was about all of us, about community, justice, and the dangerous illusion that authority always equals right. A few months after the article went viral, a state representative reached out. They were drafting a bill nicknamed Karen's Law, designed to curb HOA abuse by increasing transparency and limiting enforcement powers. They wanted my input. I laughed at first, thinking it was a joke. But it wasn't. They meant it. So, I agreed to consult, unofficially. I wasn't looking for fame or credit. I just wanted to make sure no one else ever had to wake up to an intruder with a clipboard and a sense of entitlement. The law passed a year later. On the day it did, I drove Ethan to school, then stopped by the lake that bordered our subdivision, the same lake Karen once claimed didn't meet HOA aesthetic standards. I stood there for a long time, watching the sunlight ripple across the water. A breeze moved through the reeds, carrying with it the faint echo of laughter from nearby kids. And I realized something profound, something I hadn't been able to see while I was in the middle of the chaos. Karen hadn't just tried to control a community. She'd exposed its fractures. She'd forced people to pick sides, to think about fairness, to ask themselves what kind of neighbors they wanted to be. And in a twisted way, her downfall had rebuilt what she'd tried to destroy. But even as peace returned, one part of me stayed cautious. Trauma leaves habits. I still checked my cameras at night. Still locked every window. Still kept my gun close. Not out of fear, but out of respect for what fear had taught me. Then, one ordinary evening, something happened that tied the past and present together in a way I couldn't ignore. It was a crisp Saturday night in November. Ethan was upstairs gaming with his friends, laughter echoing through the house. I was cleaning up dinner dishes when the doorbell rang. I glanced at the monitor. A woman stood on the porch, her face obscured by a hood and the porch light glare. For a second, my heart stopped. The silhouette looked eerily familiar. I opened the door slowly, every muscle tense. "Mr. Callahan?" she asked softly. "Yes?" She pulled back her hood. I didn't recognize her, but her expression was cautious, almost haunted. "I'm Karen's daughter," she said quietly. "I needed to talk to you." I stood there, speechless. I hadn't even known Karen had a daughter. Before I could respond, she added quickly, "I'm not here to cause trouble. I just wanted to apologize for everything my mother did. I didn't grow up around her, she and my dad divorced when I was little. But when all this hit the news, I saw the stories, the videos, and I needed to make things right, somehow." Her voice trembled as she spoke. She was controlling, even with me, she continued. "Always thought she knew best. When she lost control here, I think it broke her. But I also think, deep down, she thought she was protecting people. That's what made her dangerous." For the first time in a long time, I felt something unexpected, pity. Karen's reign of terror had left scars on so many lives, including her own family's. I invited her daughter in. We talked for over an hour. She shared stories of growing up with Karen, the perfectionism, the endless rules, the way she'd make lists for every tiny thing. She once grounded me for a week for not color-coding my binders, she said with a sad laugh. By the end of the conversation, I realized something important. Karen had been broken long before she tried to break us. She wasn't born a monster, she'd become one through fear, insecurity, and obsession with control. When Karen's daughter left that night, she handed me a small envelope. She wanted this kept safe, she said. I found it in her things after the sentencing. It's addressed to you. After she left, I sat at the table for a long time before opening it. Inside was a handwritten note. "You won because you understood fear. But remember, rules and chaos are just reflections of the same thing, control. Use yours wisely." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even a threat. It was insight. Twisted, yes, but honest in a way only Karen could be. I burned the letter in the fireplace that night. Watched the flames curl the paper, watched the smoke twist up into the chimney and disappear into the cold air. And as I stood there, the warmth against my face, I whispered, "Goodbye, Karen." From that day forward, I chose to stop living like I was waiting for her shadow. The lock stayed, the cameras stayed, but they became tools, not crutches. The fear had taught me to protect what mattered, but the peace taught me to live again. Now, years later, when I look out over our quiet neighborhood, kids laughing, sprinklers ticking, porch lights glowing like sentinels, I think about how close we came to losing it all because of one woman's need for control. And then I think about how one night, when she crossed through my window and my son triggered that alarm, it didn't just expose her madness, it awakened our strength. Because in the end, Karen didn't destroy this community. She forged it. And no matter how loud that alarm had been, it was the sound of freedom being reclaimed.